Memphis, Tennessee, Graceland Estate, Music Room, November 16, 1971. Tuesday evening, 9:15 p.m. The Music Room at Graceland is not a performance space. This is the first thing that matters about the setting. It is not a stage, and it is not a studio, and it is not any of the professionally designed acoustic environments that Elvis Presley has spent his career performing in and recording in and inhabiting as the natural extension of a musical identity that has been shaped by those environments over 17 years of professional practice. It is a room in a home, a large room, appointed with the specific excess of someone who has had money long enough to furnish the things that money cannot furnish, but who has not yet fully understood that the things money cannot furnish are the things that make the things money can furnish worth having. The piano in the corner is real, and it is good, and it is played regularly. The acoustic properties of the room are the accidental acoustic properties of a room that was designed for living rather than for listening, and they are not bad properties. They are simply honest properties. What you bring into this room is what the room returns to you without the flattering mediation of professional acoustic treatment. 12 people are in the room tonight. The occasion is not an occasion in the formal sense. It is a Tuesday evening at Graceland, which is its own category of event for the people who are present, because Tuesday evenings at Graceland in 1971 are the specific kind of informal gathering that develops around a figure of Elvis Presley's magnitude, when that figure is in residence and is feeling social, which is a condition that expresses itself differently on different evenings, and that the people around him have learned to read with the accuracy that people develop for reading the conditions of someone they depend on for the emotional weather of their professional and personal lives. Tonight, Elvis is feeling generous. This is the specific reading that the people around him have made of the current condition, generous in the way that can precede something that carries within it the potential for the generosity to be expressed in a direction that is not purely benevolent, that is generous with its own entertainment at the possible expense of someone else's comfort. The people who know him well know this version of generous. They know what it can become. Among the 12 people in the music room are 4 members of the Memphis Mafia, the informal inner circle of associates and friends that has surrounded Elvis since his first years of fame. People whose professional and social lives have organized themselves around him to the degree that their presence in this room on this Tuesday evening is as natural as their presence in any room he occupies. There are 2 musicians, session players who have worked with Elvis on his most recent recording sessions and who are at Graceland tonight, at his invitation for reasons that are more social than professional. There is a woman who is introduced simply by her first name and who is present in the specific quality of presence that certain people at Graceland have on certain evenings, present in a way that does not require or invite explanation, and there is Bruce Lee. Bruce is in Memphis for 2 days. He is here because a martial arts demonstration he agreed to months ago for a private event organized by a contact in the Tennessee business community has brought him to the city. A demonstration that took place the previous afternoon, and that concluded with an introduction to someone who knows someone who is in Graceland's orbit and who extended an invitation that Bruce accepted with the simple curiosity he brings to any new environment that has the potential to produce new understanding. He arrived at Graceland at 7 in the evening. He has been here for 2 hours and 15 minutes. In those 2 hours and 15 minutes, he has observed the room with the quality of observation that is his default mode in any new environment. The complete attentive observation of a person who has learned that environments tell you more than the people in them usually tell you, that the space itself is a primary source of information about what kind of things are possible in it and what kind of things are not. What the music room at Graceland has told him in 2 hours and 15 minutes is this. It is a room organized around one person's needs, not in the physical arrangement, which is comfortable and informal and does not place Elvis in a position of obvious centrality, in the social arrangement. In the specific way that every conversation in the room, regardless of who is conducting it, contains a portion of its energy, oriented toward awareness of Elvis's state, Elvis's attention, Elvis's engagement. The room's social gravity has a single source, and everything in the room orbits it, some things closely and some things at greater distance, but everything orbiting. Elvis is at the piano. He is playing, not performing. The distinction matters in the specific context of a man who has been performing since he was 19 years old and who has developed across 17 years of professional performance the capacity to produce music that sounds like performance even when it is not, that carries the quality of the performed thing, because performance has become the default expression of his musical identity. What he is doing tonight at the piano is not that. It is something quieter, something that exists before the performance quality switches on. Something that people in this room who have heard Elvis play in private contexts recognize as the most truthful version of the thing. He plays for 20 minutes, while the conversations in the room run at the low, comfortable volume of a Tuesday evening gathering among people who know each other well enough not to need to fill the silence with deliberate social production. Then he stops. He looks around the room with the quality of attention that the people around him have learned to track, because it precedes the thing that is coming. The expression of the generous condition that has been present all evening in the specific version of it that is about to become directed. He looks at Bruce. He says, "You know what we have not done tonight." He says it to the room, but he is looking at Bruce when he says it. The room waits. He says, "We have not heard from our guest. He has been here all evening, and he has been very quiet and very observant, and I think that is polite. But I also think it is maybe time for our guest to contribute something to the evening." He says this with the smile that his inner circle recognizes, the smile that is warm and genuine in its warmth, and that contains inside the warmth something else, something that has learned over 17 years of absolute public adoration, that the room always accommodates whatever it wants to do, that the smile is the license, and the license is always granted. Bruce looks at Elvis. He says, "What would you like me to contribute?" The question is direct and without defensiveness. The question of a person who is genuinely asking rather than deflecting. Elvis says, "Sing something." The room shifts, not visibly, not in a way that a camera would capture. In the specific way that 12 people simultaneously recalibrate the social situation they are inside of, each person's recalibration a private thing that does not produce observable behavior, but that is real and that the room's social atmosphere reflects in its collective temperature. Because the room knows what this is. Not necessarily in the specific detail of what Elvis intends, but in the general category, they have seen the generous condition produce directed expressions before. They have seen the room accommodate those expressions. They have seen people in Bruce's position, guests at Graceland, people who are significant in their own worlds and who have walked through the Graceland gates with the comfortable confidence of people whose significance is recognized wherever they go, encounter the specific experience of being inside the Graceland social gravity and finding that the gravity is stronger than their previous experience of any room has prepared them for. They have seen what happens when the smile makes a request that is designed to produce a specific outcome. The specific outcome tonight is visible in advance to anyone who knows the room. Bruce Lee is not a singer. He is not from this tradition. He is not from Memphis or the American South or the cultural context from which this room's understanding of music has been developed. He is a martial artist and a filmmaker from Hong Kong who has demonstrated extraordinary capability in his own domain and who is now being asked to perform in a domain that is not his domain. In a room where the standard of performance has been set for 17 years by the greatest performer in popular music history, in front of 12 people who know that standard and who will measure whatever happens against it. The request is generous in its surface and not entirely generous in its intention. This is Elvis. Being Elvis in the way that Elvis can be Elvis in the room where everything accommodates him and no one has in 17 years of absolute accommodation given him the specific experience of a request made with this kind of smile, not producing the outcome, the smile anticipated. Bruce says, "All right." The room recalibrates again. This is not the response the room expected. The response the room expected was the polite deflection, the gracious decline, the humble acknowledgement that this is not my domain and I defer to the master of the domain. The response that would have allowed Elvis to be generous in return, to insist and to be resisted and to insist again, and finally to say with magnanimous finality that it was only a bit of fun and of course no one was required to perform, producing in the room the warmth of his generosity, while having demonstrated without the demonstration, costing him anything that the room accommodates his direction. The all right removes that structure from the available options. Elvis looks at Bruce with the smile still present, but with something new in the eyes behind it, not concern. Something more like the specific recalibration of a person who has set something in motion, and who is now genuinely uncertain for the first time in the evening what the motion will produce. He says, "The floor is yours." Bruce stands up. He does not move to the piano. He does not ask for instrumental accompaniment. He does not spend time in the preparatory behaviors that people produce when they are gathering themselves for a performance they are uncertain about. He simply stands in the center of the music room at Graceland on a Tuesday evening in November 1971, and he is quiet for a moment. Then he begins. What he sings is not what the room expects. The room expects one of several things. It expects the uncomfortable performance of someone operating outside their element, the slightly painful experience of watching a person whose excellence exists elsewhere demonstrate the limits of that excellence in a domain it does not cover. It expects the charming admission of inability that produces the warmth of shared human limitation. It expects the polite fumbling that allows Elvis to be generous in response. It does not expect what it gets. Bruce sings a Cantonese folk song. He sings it in Cantonese, which is not a language that anyone in the room speaks or has prior experience of hearing sung, which means the room cannot evaluate it against a known standard, cannot measure it against prior exposure to the tradition it comes from, cannot place it within a comparative framework that would allow judgment of its quality relative to what that tradition's practice looks like at various levels. What the room can evaluate is only what it directly receives, the voice itself, the relationship between the voice and the song, the quality of what the singing is regardless of what it is singing. The voice is not Elvis Presley's voice. This is not a qualification. This is simply the first fact. No voice is Elvis Presley's voice except Elvis Presley's voice, and the comparison is not the point and is not what the room makes. The voice is Bruce Lee's voice in the same way that everything Bruce does is Bruce Lee's thing. It is entirely and without remainder the expression of the person producing it, rather than an attempt to produce something that an external standard has defined as correct. It is not technically trained in the sense of formal vocal training. It does not have the developed instrument of a professional singer. What it has is something that the room receives before it has had time to assess it, which is complete authenticity. The absolute absence of performance in a room where performance has been the operating mode for 17 years. The voice of a person singing a song from their own tradition in their own language, with the relationship to the material that comes from having grown up inside the tradition, from having the song as a part of who you are rather than as a piece of repertoire you have learned. The song is not long. It is the length that the song is. When it ends, the music room at Graceland is quiet. Not the quiet of a room waiting for a response to form, the quiet of a room in which the response has already formed and is simply being experienced before it is expressed. Elvis is at the piano. He has turned on the bench to face the room. His expression is not the expression the room knows for the various outcomes that these evenings typically produce. It is something else. Something that the people who have been around him since the early years of his career will recognize as an expression from before the 17 years, before the absolute accommodation, before the room always giving him what the room gives him. It is the expression of someone who has been surprised by music, not impressed in the way that performance can impress, which is the response to craft. Surprised in the way that genuine music surprises, which is the response to truth. The response to encountering in a piece of music something that was not manufactured and cannot be manufactured, something that arrived because the person making it is what they are, and the song is what it is, and the space between them is the authentic space where music actually lives. He says, "What was that?" Bruce says, "A song my mother sang from Guangdong province, where my family is from." Elvis says, "You have been singing it your whole life. It is not a question. It is a recognition." The recognition of one person who carries music in their body for life-specific reasons, recognizing another person who carries music in their body for life-specific reasons, which is a different thing entirely from carrying music as repertoire. Bruce says, "Since I was very young, yes." Elvis is quiet for a moment. He says, "When I was a boy in Tupelo, before any of this, before everything this became, I used to sing in church, not because it was expected, because it was the only place where singing was just singing, where it was not about anything except what it was. He pauses. He says, I have not thought about that in a long time. The room is very still. What Elvis has just said is not something he says. Not in rooms like this one. Not with people around him whose professional and personal lives are organized around maintaining the specific version of Elvis Presley that the 17 years have produced. He has said something that comes from before the 17 years, from the place that the song from Guangdong province apparently reached with a directness that no one in the room, including Elvis, anticipated. He looks at Bruce. He says, I asked you to do that to embarrass you. The sentence lands in the room with the specific weight of true things said simply. Bruce says, I know. Elvis says, you knew. Bruce says, yes. Elvis says, and you sang anyway. Bruce says, you asked. The only question was, what to sing. I sang what was mine to sing. Elvis looks at him for a long moment. He says, what was yours to sing? Not a repetition, a receiving of the phrase. The specific attention of a person encountering a way of describing something that reorganizes what they thought they understood about the thing. He says, I stopped knowing what was mine to sing a long time ago. The room around them has ceased to be the social context it was 10 minutes ago. The 12 people in the music room at Graceland are not an audience for a Tuesday evening gathering anymore. They are the specific witnesses to a conversation that the room did not know it was going to contain, that grew from the soil of something that was intended to be small and became, through the specific way that true things have, of expanding the space they occupy, something that the room has to accommodate rather than the other way around. Bruce says, what was yours to sing is still yours. What you sang in Tupelo is still in you. It is underneath everything that came after. The everything that came after is real. The Tupelo singing is also real. They do not cancel each other, they are both true. Elvis says the Tupelo singing is 30 years ago. Bruce says true things do not expire. Elvis is quiet. He turns back to the piano. He plays a chord. Then another. Not the chords of his professional repertoire, not the vocabulary of the 17 years. Something simpler. Something that sounds like it comes from before the vocabulary was developed, a progression that has the quality of the church in Tupelo in it, that carries the acoustic memory of wooden pews and a congregation singing, because the singing was the point, and not because the singing was a product. He begins to sing. What he sings is not a song from his catalog, it is a gospel song from his childhood. He does not perform it. He sings it in the specific way that Bruce sang the Cantonese folk song, from inside rather than from outside, from the place where the song and the person are the same thing rather than from the place where the person is performing the song. The music room at Graceland holds it. The 12 people in the room hold it. When he finishes, the room is quiet for a long time. Then one of the Memphis Mafia, a man who has known Elvis since before the 17 years and who has not heard what he just heard from Elvis in all the years since, says nothing, because there is nothing to say that would not make the moment smaller than it is. Elvis sits at the piano. He looks at Bruce. He says, I set you up tonight to show the room something. I was going to show them that you were out of your depth in my house, in my room, on my ground. He pauses. He says, what you showed them instead is that your ground is yours wherever you stand on it. Bruce says, yes. Elvis says, and I have been standing on someone else's ground for 17 years. Not because anyone took mine, because I let the 17 years cover it. Bruce says, the ground is still there. Elvis says, how do you know? Bruce says, because you just sang from it. Elvis looks at the piano keys. He plays one note, just one, lets it decay in the honest acoustics of the room that was designed for living rather than listening. Watches, it becomes silence. He says, I owe you an apology. Bruce says, no. Elvis says, I do. I brought you into my house and asked you to do something in public with the intention of making you look small. Bruce says, the intention did not produce what you intended. Elvis says, no, it produced the opposite. He says, that is going to stay with me for a long time. Bruce says, the Tupelo singing will also stay with you, now that you have found it again. Elvis looks at him. He says, you are not what I expected. Bruce says, "What did you expect?" Elvis says, "Someone who would be diminished by this room, by the gravity of this place." Everyone is diminished by this place eventually. It is a function of what this place has become. Bruce says, "Rooms do not diminish people. Rooms reveal people. What this room revealed tonight is what was already here before the room had anything to say about it." Elvis says, "What was already here?" Bruce says, "You, before the 17 years. The person who sang in Tupelo because the singing was the point." Elvis is very still. He says, "I have not been that person in a very long time." Bruce says, "You were that person 20 minutes ago. The room holds this, the 12 people hold it." The music room at Graceland on a Tuesday evening in November 1971 holds the specific quality of a space where something true has been recovered, not manufactured, not performed, not produced by the room's considerable capacity to produce things, but recovered, found again, after being buried under the accumulated weight of 17 years of everything that came after the church in Tupelo. Later in the evening, after the conversation has returned to the comfortable social register of a Tuesday gathering among people who know each other, after the immediate intensity of the preceding hour has been absorbed into the evening's ongoing life, Elvis plays the piano again. He plays the gospel song again. He plays it the same way, not performed, sung from inside, from the place where the song and the person are the same thing. Then he plays something else, a transition, a bridge between the Tupelo sound and the 17 years of professional music that followed it. A piece of music that does not exist yet in his catalog because it has not been written yet, that is being composed in real time in the music room at Graceland on a Tuesday evening in November, in the specific way that music is composed when the person composing it is entirely present in their own history rather than in the performed version of it. The 12 people in the room listen. Bruce listens. What he hears is a man finding his way back to his own ground through the specific route that music provides when it is allowed to be what it is rather than what the 17 years have required it to be. He stays at Graceland until 1 in the morning. He leaves the way he arrived, without production, without ceremony, with a handshake at the door that Elvis holds for a moment longer than handshakes are usually held. Elvis says, "I am going to remember tonight differently than I expected to remember it when it started." Bruce says, "Yes." Elvis says, "That is your doing." Bruce says, "It is yours. I only asked you to listen to what was already there." He leaves. Elvis stands at the door of Graceland for a moment after the car has gone down the drive, in the November Tennessee night, with the specific quality of silence that follows genuine encounters, the silence that is not the absence of what just happened, but the continuation of it in a different form. He goes back to the piano, he plays until 3 in the morning, not performing, not producing, playing, from the place that the Tuesday evening recovered, from the Tupelo ground that the Cantonese folk song reached without knowing that was what it would reach, that arrived at the true thing through the accidental route of a request made with a smile that was not entirely generous, and that produced something that neither the smile nor the room anticipated. The biggest regret that Elvis Presley will carry from that evening does not belong to the category of regrets that his public story records. It is not a professional regret or a personal regret in the documented sense. It is this, that he waited until a Tuesday evening in November 1971 to hear in someone else's singing the thing that his own singing had started as before it became what the 17 years made it, and that the hearing came from outside rather than from inside, from a guest he had invited into his house with a smile that did not intend generosity and received it anyway. That is the regret. Not that he asked, that it took asking, that it took a martial artist from Hong Kong singing a song from Guangdong province in the music room at Graceland to return him to the church in Tupelo, where the singing was the point. The ground was always there, the song was always there, he was always there, under the 17 years waiting.